Welcome to our first lecture. This week, we're going to talk about motivation. You already know what motivation is. Motivation is a reason to do something. Specifically, we will talk about hedonic and eudaimonic motivations. Now, before I explain these terms, let's talk about your first assignment. How did it go? Could you tell why Victor Hugo is considered a genius while Sophie Kinsella, despite all the money she has made, a rather forgettable writer? I bet you didn't even read her book because you couldn't stop reading The Man Who Laughs, right? Well, wrong. The truth is that The Man Who Laughs is incredibly boring. I wouldn't be surprised if you hated it. Sophie Kinsella's book, on the other hand, is a lot of fun. It is super engaging. Now, how could that be? We're talking about Victor Hugo, the man who wrote Les Miserables, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, two of the best books ever written. Is The Man Who Laughs poorly written? Well, no. The Man Who Laughs is full of beautiful lines. I liked especially the wittiness of these two. Never did the wolf bite. The man did now and then. And so much knowledge could only end in starvation. It is very good prose. It is smart, evocative, and well structured. However, as a complete text, The Man Who Laughs is almost impossible to read. It is so incredibly slow and repetitive, it soon becomes torture, no matter how profound it may be. It's just boring. And that pains my heart because I love Victor Hugo's work. I love Les Miserables. I love The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Those books were terrific. And I know that The Man Who Laughs is a smart critique of society. But I only know that because I read it on Wikipedia. I was never able to finish this book. Life is too short to spend it on boring books. Sophie Kinsella's book, on the other hand, is a lot of fun. It is super engaging. Yes, her book is full of cliches and rather inelegant everyday language. For instance, a smile is plastered over my face as I gaze out of the window. Overwritten, isn't it? I would have said, I grin as I gaze out of the window. If I wanted to reinforce the size of the smile, even a cliche would have sounded better. I grin like a Cheshire cat as I gaze out of the window. Kinsella's prose is not the best, not the worst either. It is clear enough, vivid, and it engages from the very first line. Confessions of a Shopaholic isn't a lyrical masterpiece, but it is engaging. It is storytelling at its best. We just love it. And it is engaging even if the book is a little bit silly and superficial. As you probably have already guessed, the intention of this first exercise was to show you some extremes, how some stories are like raw broccoli, nutritious but not always appealing, while others are like cake, delicious and impossible to resist, even if they are full of empty calories. Of course, you may disagree with the examples I used. Maybe you loved Victor Hugo's book. Perhaps you found his book deep and meaningful. And perhaps chick lit isn't just your thing. Maybe you found Sophie Kinsella's work impossible to like. If that was the case, please take off your smart shoes for a minute and put yourself in the shoes of the majority, those who prefer the sweetness of the cake over the nutritious broccoli. When studying literature, we tend to focus on the writing of those we consider geniuses, writers like Hugo or Shakespeare, Bronte, Woolf, or Balzac. But there's also a lot to learn from what we love to call empty or superficial work. There is a lot to learn from Sophie Kinsella, for example. It would be a mistake to dismiss her work simply because her stories are silly and shallow. She's not all empty calories. I think she's a genius. Kinsella found a formula that has sold millions and millions of books. Her books are incredibly funny and highly entertaining. She is an expert storytelling. No matter how silly, selfish, and imperfect her characters may be, it is always easy to identify with them and therefore to engage. That's one of the mysteries we will solve during this course. How did Kinsella do it? How does she engage us? How did she bake the delicious cake and made us eat it? In a way, her success is easy to replicate. Kinsella sticks to a formula that works. Ordinary girl gets into deep trouble due to her own fault. She learns from her mistakes, and in a rather hilarious way, she solves all her problems before the end of the book. happy ending. The problem is that just like cake, when you eat too much of it, formulas can bore too. Even successful formulas eventually stop working. As we age and acquire more and more experience, we become wiser. Our taste becomes more and more sophisticated. At one point, formulas like the hero's journey stop working because, well, we've seen the same story told too many times before. Different characters, different scenarios, but the same exact plot every time. And when the plot becomes predictable, the story becomes less compelling. So we're not going to study formulas, and we're not going to study flavors and ingredients either. To understand why we tend to prefer the cake over the nutritious broccoli, what we need to understand is human nature. We like cake because cake is sweet and we like sweet stuff. And we like sweet stuff because sweet stuff is high in calories. We didn't evolve to wear skinny jeans. Evolution doesn't serve a purpose, it just happens, and we happen to evolve during times in which food was scarce. Choosing food that would make you fat used to be a good strategy for survival. We inherited the taste preferences of those who survived, which happened to be those who found sweets rewarding. Raw broccoli, on the other hand, is bitter, and so are most things that could cause us harm. Our ancestors learned to be suspicious of plants with a bitter taste. Those who didn't discriminate and ate bitter plants didn't survive. Those who were cautious thrived. Kids don't like broccoli because of its bitter taste. With time, however, and because we recognize its nutritional value, we learn to appreciate its flavor. It is similar with the stories. Mary Beth Oliver is a professor of media studies and one of the most cited researchers in media psychology. She studies how we derive meaning from stories. In 2014, she and her colleagues published a study that analyzed 582 films that came out between 1980 and 2010. They found that viewership, measured in terms of revenue and audience ratings, was higher for fun and exciting films such as comedies and action films. They also found that critical acclaim, defined in terms of the number of awards that a film received or was nominated to receive, as well as ratings from film experts like Rotten Tomatoes, was higher for more serious and somber entertainment. Films that provoked the experience of sadness and grief, such as dramas or films that were of a dark and contemplative nature. Based on these findings and previous research, Oliver and colleagues proposed that we enjoy fun and exciting stories because they bring us pleasure, just like eating cake does. Then, that we appreciate content that makes us think about what's essential in life. These kind of stories tend to be somber or sad, but we find them gratifying when we find them meaningful. And just like with broccoli, experience teaches us to associate their bitter taste with something good. Have you noticed that rather than discouraging consumption, terms such as shattering, heartbreaking, and devastating are commonly used to promote the consumption of sad stories? It is as if suggesting that a story will make us feel pain guaranteed its quality. If you think about it, most of what we consider as the best books ever written are tragedies that, under Oliver's category, would be classified not as content that we enjoy, but as content that we appreciate. Anna Karenina dies, Romeo and Juliet dies, The Great Gatsby dies, Madame Bovary dies, everyone lives miserable lives in 100 years of solitude. Esther Gobsek dies, Raskolnikov ends up in Siberia, etc. The thing is that not only we find these stories meaningful, we love them. Some of these stories are quite addictive. Take for instance Elena Ferrante's novel, My Brilliant Friend. Have you started reading it? I'm sure you will love it. And spoiler alert, it will break your heart. Because of how engaging some of these stories can be, I think that appreciation is a term a little too tepid to describe the way in which some sad and somber stories capture our attention. I think that we truly enjoy many of these sad and somber stories, painful as they may be. But that is a discussion for another class. For now, let us stick to the classifications proposed by Oliver. We enjoy stories that are a lot of fun, and we appreciate content that we find meaningful. Now, it's not an either or. You can have a broccoli cake. You can have stories that are both fun and exciting, but also meaningful. Think of Titanic, for instance. Total broccoli cake, right? Unless you're my husband, he thinks this movie was more of a cake. Or Breaking Bad. Didn't it give you a lot to think about? And it was delicious. A favorite of mine is The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. If you haven't watched it, I strongly recommend it. It is fun, and so I enjoy it using Oliver's definition, but it also makes me think about what's important in life because despite being a musical in an impossibly colorful world, it is painfully realistic. As storytellers, stories like this should be our goal. And I'm not talking about stories set in a fantastical, colorful town somewhere in France. I'm talking about stories that we can both enjoy and appreciate because of how they make us feel and because of what they teach us. Making a broccoli cake is not as simple as improving the quality of your prose, however. Imagine rewriting Transformers so that everyone has elegant, well spoken lines. My father. He distinguished himself as a remarkably good mechanic. He instilled in me the knowledge required to comprehend and provide a suitable solution to the matter. It would make for a good 5-minute comedic sketch, but a whole novel? Writing well helps, no doubt, but improving your story is not only about improving the quality of your prose. You can have terrible prose and still an incredibly meaningful story. For instance, Alice Walker wrote The Color Purple with terrible prose in purpose. Double negatives, wrong tenses, missing commas. Walker wanted to portray the speech of an uneducated black woman living in rural Georgia at the turn of the 20th century. Therefore, she went for realism rather than elegance. Alice Walker didn't win the Pulitzer Prize because of her impeccable grammar. She won the Pulitzer Prize because of her story's beauty, because of the way her story made her readers feel, and because of the way her story changed them. Showing won't necessarily make your story better either. Actually, showing when you shouldn't show can make your story worse. If you do a Google search for bad writing, you'll find a lot of examples of writers who chose to show when telling could have done a much better job. As she slowly drove up the long, winding driveway, Lady Alicia peeked out the window of her shiny blue Mercedes and spied Rodrigo, the new gardener, standing on a grassy mound with his long black hair flowing in the wind, his brown eyes piercing into her very soul, and his white shirt open to the waist, revealing his beautifully rippling muscular chest. And she thought to herself, I must tell that lazy idiot to trim the hedges by the gate. Why torture us with all this when a short line would do? This paragraph doesn't explain why Lady Alicia thought poorly of Rodrigo or whether she found him attractive. A short sentence would have been enough. What showing does, when showing is well done, is to increase the sensation of presence, the sensation of being there, inside the story. You become a first hand witness of the events. Good showing is like using a high resolution virtual reality headset. It will help your recipients feel there. Putting your readers there, however, isn't enough to keep them engaged. If the experience is boring, it won't matter how vivid it feels. Take this painting, for instance. It's pretty good, isn't it? The insects and the fruit look almost real. This painting is at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. I got it from one of the museum's tweets. Now, suppose you were visiting the Getty. How much time do you think you would devote to this painting? It is a nice painting, but if you are like most museum visitors, you wouldn't spend much more than a few seconds looking at it. Actually, I bet that this painting has already bored you by now, and that you are more than ready for me to switch to the next slide. But let's play a little game. Let's make the experience engaging. There is a little emoji hidden there. Pause the video and find it. Time yourself if you want. Ready? Did you find it? The emoji was here. It is a little zebra. Unless you noticed the zebra right away, you probably looked at the painting for a little longer than you normally would because you were given a mission. That mission, not just the quality of the painting, is what made you engage. So, how do we write a compelling story? Well, you hide an emoji. You give your readers a challenging goal. Now, why would your readers lose their time trying to attain an imposed goal? You wouldn't read the whole of Balzac's work to find out how many zebras are hidden there, right? That's an important question, so let us start there. Why do we consume stories? Consuming a story is what in psychology we call a goal directed behavior. I say consuming because you can read, watch, or listen to a story. You can also be creating a story as you play a video game. What we will discuss here applies to any medium, not just to text. Goal directed behavior is kind of self explanatory, but let's see the definition from the American Psychological Association or APA just to make sure that we're on the right path. Goal directed behavior is behavior that is oriented toward attaining a particular goal. Well, a dumb moment. Get ready because psychology is full of them. Now, this definition raises another question. What is a goal? A goal is a representation of a desired state in the future, acting as a cause for action. Together and applied to the matter of story consumption, what these definitions mean is that we consume stories with a goal in mind, and that goal represents a desire to change our current state. We don't invest our precious time in reading a story just because a story appeared in our path. When we pick up a book or turn on the TV, we don't do it randomly. We do it because we want to attain change, because we want to go from an original state to a desired state. Dolph Zillman's mood management theory explains what this desired change is. Zillman proposed that media selection follows hedonic impulses to dissipate an aversive affective state or enhance and lengthen a positive one. Affective means relative to feelings and emotions. The word affect refers to any experience of feeling or emotion, ranging from suffering to elation, from the simplest to the most complex sensations of feeling. Mood management theory also proposes that the desired beneficial effect of consuming media may be sought now or in the future, as when content consumption follows a desire to alleviate an anticipated problem, and thus story recipients may undergo an adverse experience in the interest of future consummatory behavior believed to be of superior hedonic quality. As for instance, when we force ourselves to study a boring subject to acquire knowledge, or watch a painful story to find out whether the hero will succeed. In plain English, what mood management theory means is that we consume media content and therefore stories to change the way we feel. We consume stories to go from meh to yay, even if in the way there we got to experience aversive states like sadness, anger, or fear. Or to go from feeling mildly curious to marveled or moved. Or from feeling anxious to feeling relaxed. We select media content based on our current affective state and how we would like to feel to manage our mood. That is, we consume media content perhaps looking to be entertained because we're just plain bored or because we want to improve our mood. We may also be investing our time in consuming media because we want to escape, because we want to feel something different, because life is grim and dull, or because we just need a rest from our everyday. And we also consume media to acquire knowledge. Maybe because we wanted to study how Virginia Woolf uses a stream of consciousness. Perhaps because we wanted to learn what it would be like to live on another planet, or what life was like during the Roman times or during the Middle Ages. Or maybe what we're looking for is practical knowledge, instructions on how to bake a cake or code in Python. In the end, satisfying any of these goals will change your affective state, probably for the better. When you want to be entertained, what you are looking for is to change your mood. You want to feel differently. Perhaps you need to repair a faulty mood, and now you want to laugh at cat videos. Or maybe you want the thrill of a horror story, or you want the excitement of an adventure film. Either way, you want to go from one affective state to one that at that moment you consider more attractive than your current one. When you want to escape from reality, it is basically the same. You want to leave a current state. You want to forget about your worries, your pains, and temporarily live a different life to change, repair, or improve your mood so that now you feel excited instead of overwhelmed, calm instead of stressed, etc. Slater and colleagues explore the concept of escapism and knowledge acquisition in their Tabot's theory. According to this theory, story consumption follows the desire to explore a different reality. That desire comes from the awareness of self regulation because it is exhausting to be oneself day after day. We need a rest from ourselves, and stories allow us to explore a temporary expansion of the boundaries of the self. Imagine, for instance, what it is like to be an elementary teacher and a parent. You deal with kids at work, and you deal with kids at home. You find yourself either scolding, lecturing, or comforting little people all the time. You always have to be an example. You cannot use sarcasm, be snarky, sassy, or a flirt. That's not what teachers do. What the Tabot's theory proposes is that stories allow us to leave the self behind temporarily and find out what it would be like to be someone else. You can be a princess, a rocker, an astronaut, or an archaeologist, all without having to leave your couch. Finally, when what you want is to learn something, you will go for content that will teach you something useful. As a writer looking to provoke change, satisfying your readers' goals should be your goal too. Why? Because you want them to remain engaged. Thus, if your recipients need to repair their mood, your content should make them feel relaxed and happy. If your recipients are looking for excitement, your content should give them a thrill. And if your recipients are looking for practical information, they should receive that information first. If you give them what they want, they will be more receptive to attend to what you have to say. So, if you improve their mood, they will be more open to learning. And if you teach them something useful, their mood will improve too. Now, sometimes what your recipients will be looking for when they want to change their mood is not just to experience pleasure, but for the experience to be meaningful. Sometimes what readers want is to feel inspired, to feel more connected to others, to feel elated or moved. And the kind of knowledge they are looking for is not just factual knowledge, but that which is thought provoking, that provides deeper insight, meaning, and purpose, that invites them to reflect on what's important in life. In any case, whether we're looking for entertainment, escapism, knowledge, or meaning, the decision to invest the scarce resources of time and attention in consuming a story follows the anticipation of a desired affective state. And that is precisely what engagement is. Engagement is a continuous decision to invest the scarce resources of time and attention in a potentially rewarding task, one that will make you feel good, even if the reward is a dummy one, like the satisfaction of finding the zebra hidden inside a painting, because finding that zebra will make us feel smarter. Effective change is the goal. Engagement comes from the French word engager, to commit. Engagement, however, is not like most commitments. Engagement is a commitment that we can leave at any moment without consequences. For instance, if we get bored. That's why, rather than being a one time decision, engagement is a continuous one. The opposite of engagement is boredom, the desire to abandon an unrewarding task. Boredom is a signal from the brain telling us to stop doing what we're doing and go do something else, something rewarding. Just like pain is beneficial because pain alerts us from damage, boredom is beneficial because it promotes change. For a writer, therefore, to provoke boredom is bad. Boredom is the number one enemy of a compelling writer. Boredom is the enemy to defeat, and it should be avoided at all times. This takes me to a part that I skipped from the APA definition of goal directed behavior. Tricky me. I thought you would find it boring before, but now it is useful. Goal directed behavior is typically identifiable by observing that an organism ceases search behavior and engages in detour behavior when it encounters obstacles to the goal. Aha! This is kind of duh too, I recognize, but it is very important. What this tells us is that the goal driving our behavior should be perceived as attainable, that the organism, in our case the reader, should always have hope. When hope disappears, the task at hand loses purpose, and we engage in detour behavior. Hence, as a writer, satisfying your reader's basic goals should be your main goal. You want to write something that will change your recipient's mood and that will teach them something useful, something meaningful. Your goal should be then to make your recipients perceive your story as both delicious and nutritious. And you want to make progress toward those goals evident so that the organism, your story recipient, does not engage in the tour behavior. Now, note that I've been using the word recipient instead of readers because this applies whether your story will be read, viewed, or listened to. I could use the word audience, but I like the word recipient because even as a plural, it suggests that stories are consumed individually, that stories are targeted to each of us, that consuming a story is a personal experience. As we will see, that is the case. Anyway, the best thing about satisfying these two goals at the same time is that the more you rock people's experiences, the more you change the way they feel, the more that they will be willing to pay attention to whatever it is that you have to say. Likewise, whenever you teach your recipients something useful, you change the way they feel. Learning makes the experience meaningful. Now, you may say, wait a second, those are not my goals. My goals as a writer are to make a stupid amount of money, to become more famous than the Beatles. Well, I'm a writer too. That's a goal I can relate. My personal goal is to make enough money to retire to a small town in southern Italy where I could just write and write. Now, whatever your ultimate goal may be, you will need to sell your work to achieve that goal and to sell it over and over and over so that you can make a stupid amount of money. You need to make your work more compelling, more engaging. That means satisfying your recipients' goals, giving your readers what they demand. Now, you will wonder, what about the character's goals? Well, have some patience. We will get there. First, let's focus on your recipient's goals. We now know that you have to change your recipient's mood. You have to elicit the kind of mood they want to be in, but you also have to teach them something useful, something meaningful, something that will stay with them for long after they finish your story and that will make them feel that the time they spent reading your work was time well spent. What your work needs to satisfy to be more compelling is what in media psychology we call hedonic and eudaimonic motivations. The first refer to the seeking for pleasure and enjoyment. Readers following hedonic motivations are looking for content that they will find delicious, like cake, that they will make them clap and laugh, tap on their knees with excitement, or at least erase their gloomy mood. Readers following eudaimonic motivations prefer content that they will find meaningful, content that may not be as delicious, but that they will find more nutritious, like broccoli, content that will satisfy their desire for greater insight, motivate self reflection and contemplation of poignancy or meaningfulness, of what makes life worth living. At the end of the day, both motivations refer to the pursuit of happiness. Hedonic happiness is that which comes with amusement and pleasure. In contrast, eudaimonic happiness is that which comes with personal expressiveness, self realization, and personal development, engaging in experiences that provide meaning. Hedonic happiness is easy to understand, is that which translates to a reduction in negative affect and the experience of positive affect. We experience negative affect after failing to achieve a goal, avoid a threat, or when we are unsatisfied with our current state. We experience positive affect when we attain or are about to attain a goal, when a threat has been avoided, or when we are content with our current situation. Hedonic happiness is about satisfying a more immediate need. Eudaimonic happiness is a bit more complicated. The term was originally defined by Aristotle as that coming from living well, living a life that embodies the moral virtues such as justice, courage, gentleness, generosity, and truthfulness, and intellectual virtues such as knowledge, wisdom, and intuition. Now, we don't really like preachy stories, do we? We like morality tales like Pinocchio, where a rascal learns a lesson, or dramas like Jane Eyre, where virtue is rewarded, but only after many adverse events. Oliver thus proposed that entertainment content is meaningful not when it is preachy, but when it is of greater artistic value, moving, and thought provoking. And this is key. Content becomes meaningful when it inspires, when it causes the viewer to contemplate moral human virtues and what it means to live a just or true life. Following Oliver, other researchers have proposed these dimensions of eudaimonic well being: positive relations with others, finding a sense of relatedness, finding purpose or meaning in life, satisfying one's need for autonomy, environmental mastery or competence, self acceptance, achieving personal growth, and living according to central personal values. In a nutshell, the difference between stories that are like cake and stories that are like broccoli is that the former are entertaining and translate to the experience of joy and the reduction of pain, while the others inspire us to think and connect with others, motivating us to become better persons. Meaningful content brings happiness by making us grow as individuals. You probably have heard of how the arch of a story defines the story structure. Every story must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And throughout the story, as the main character pursues his or her goals, there is a process of transformation. When we consume a story, we, as the story recipients, are also transformed. That transformation occurs when we reflect on what the story meant to us. Can you think of any stories that transformed you? One of the stories that changed me growing up was Balzac's novella Le Bal d'Escaut. It is the story of a young, capricious woman who, after rejecting every man that courts her, meets the perfect man at a dance. But then she marries an old rich man to spite him when her perfect man doesn't do exactly as she wants. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride. The ending broke my heart, but it gave me a valuable life lesson. Pride can be costly. Another story that changed me was The Clan of the Cave Bear. It's about daring to be brave when you're different. It's the story of a girl growing up in a world dominated by men, men who happen to be literal Neanderthals. The story is set during the Stone Age. Another one that transformed me was The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It is a beautiful, sad story, but the message is rather cynical. Don't let love blind you. We tend to use adjectives such as poignant, emotional, moving, touching, heartbreaking, devastating, shattering, or just sad to describe meaningful stories because these kind of stories, the kind of stories that mean the most, tend to provoke pain, a lot of pain. Pain itself does not make a story meaningful. If pain was sufficient to make a story meaningful, horror and gore would get the most awards. And Oliver and Barch mentioned the example of films like Steel Magnolias, where sadness is the intended or primary affective reaction, but rather than being appreciated, these films are more aptly described as silly, manipulative, or melodramatic. Well, meaning is subjective. I personally liked Steel Magnolias. I found it meaningful. What is meaningful to me may not be meaningful to you, and vice versa. What the pain does is to make us care, to call attention to what is important. From that caring, engagement and reflection follow. Take, for instance, the original Star Wars trilogy. These movies meant a lot to a lot of people. Have you watched these films? If you watched these films for the first time as an adult, chances are you judged them as superficial fun, lousy dialogue, predictable plot, repetitive cliches. But if you watched these films as a kid, they probably meant a lot to you. To date, millions of grown ups still find these movies incredibly meaningful. Finding meaning is a subjective experience. There seems to be a pattern nonetheless. Pain that calls our attention to what's important. I think that's why everyone's favorite is the saddest film of the three, The Empire Strikes Back. Throughout this course, we will see that pain, or more correctly, the experience of negative affect, is associated with increased attention and memory, and that it is a necessary condition not only for engagement, but also for the experience of positive affect. A common consequence of experiencing negative affect is at least some level of rumination, obsessional thinking involving excessive, repetitive thoughts or themes that interfere with other forms of mental activity. It is no surprise, therefore, that sad and somber stories make you think much more than cheerful, jolly ones. And if you think about it, the content that we enjoy also makes us experience at least some level of negative affect. Watching others experience distress motivates us. It makes us want to help. It makes us care. Caring is what makes us engage. The Man Who Laughs is a tragic story. It is the story of a man whose face was mutilated into a perpetual grin, making him repulsive to everybody. The problem with the novel is that Victor Hugo takes too long to cause pain. We have to swallow two preliminary chapters that seem eternal, even if full of nice reflections, and even if they're only about 20 pages long. And those chapters seem eternal because they don't provoke any strong emotional response. We don't understand their purpose. They don't make us care. Then, once we get to know the protagonist, it still takes a while to learn about his tragedy. Judging by those long unemotional chapters, our initial goal, that of being entertained, doesn't seem attainable, not because we cannot see the hidden zebra, but because we are never asked to find it. We get bored, and that bored state motivates cease behavior. We toss the book as far as we can. Sophie Kinsella, on the other hand, let us know right away that Becky is in trouble. By page 2, in the letters that serve as a prologue, we know that she has an overdraft in her bank account. Then, the story begins with her panicking about her credit card balance. We are assigned a task: see the protagonist come out of financial distress. Kinsella's story is a light comedy, so it wasn't written with the intentions to cause too much distress, but take note, the pain is in there, and the pain serves as a hook. It makes us care for the protagonist. Not only we care, soon our investment of time and attention becomes rewarding. The story makes us laugh. We perceive progress toward our goal, that of being entertained, and that perception of progress motivates us to continue investing time and attention and to fully embrace Becky's goal. I like to say that when you write, you need to keep a knife next to your mouth. Every so often, you need to pick up that knife and stab your recipient's hearts. You need to cause at least some distress. That's the only way to keep your recipients interested in whatever it is that you have to say and to provoke effective change. What distinguishes transformative stories is that they tend to provoke strong emotional emotions: sadness, fear, anger, disappointment, but also that they are moving. Their capacity to move us, I dare say, is what makes these stories meaningful. Being moved may feel a little bit like being sad, but it is an affective state different from sadness. Being moved promotes approaching, attending, helping, and bonding as behavioral responses. Sadness doesn't make you want to approach others. Sadness makes you want to withdraw and ruminate. You can be both moved and sad, but experiencing sadness is not the same thing as being moved. We'll talk more about this in future lectures. For now, think about how the books that made you feel, and then think about the story that you would like to write. Ask yourself, how do I want my readers to feel? That is, besides making them feel pain, because I'm going to be very insistent on this, you'll have to use that knife, even if what you're writing is comedy. Then, ask yourself, what should be the meaning of my story? By meaning, I mean the change that you want to provoke, your story's message. It could be a morality lesson, practical knowledge, or a set of beliefs. It could be bringing awareness to a social problem. What is the meaning of my story might be a question that you have never asked yourself before, at least not consciously. It is nevertheless a crucial question because the answer to that question will define your path. Do you know the old saying that the end justifies the means? I like to say that the end procures the means, or better, that the goal procures the means. When you know exactly where you want to go, you figure out how to get there. If there is no path, you make the path. You ask yourself pertinent questions and start getting the right answers. Once you know where you will be going, the world starts building by itself. The characters you need suddenly pop up. Scenes come to mind. Your work comes to life. Having a clear understanding of how you want to transform your readers creates the path to follow. Elena Ferrante's book, for instance, has a feminist message. In an interview with the New York Times, she reveals what that message is. She says, even if we're constantly tempted to lower our guard out of love or wariness or sympathy or kindness, We women shouldn't do it. We can lose from one moment to the next everything that we have achieved. What Ferrante leaves us with is a reflection of what it means to grow up in a world dominated by men, specifically uneducated, selfish men. A world in which the use of violence is the norm, not the exception. Ferrante could have just told us, if you're a woman, always be alert, and if you're a man, be nice to women, and she could leave it there. But the message wouldn't have been as strong, don't you think? She wrote instead a very, very long and painful story that would move us, make us think, and that we would find meaningful. Now, what about my book? Well, I have a cynical sense of humor. I like creepy, dark humor, like the Addams Family. And like most gay men, I love camp and over the top social satire, like John Waters' films. I guess I like making fun of the ugly aspects of society. So I wanted to write something that would make my readers laugh, but also feel extreme discomfort and reflect a little. And I wanted to talk about two negative traits of gay men: anger and superficiality. My two main characters, Jignesh and Charlie, represent the extremes of that spectrum. I created these images by merging computer generated photos with a photo of mine using FaceApp. Jignesh represents anger. He's overweight, sexually frustrated, and bitter at life. Charlie represents extreme shallowness. He's needy, greedy, insecure, and unable to look for himself. Have you heard the joke, hell hath no fury like a homosexual slightly inconvenienced? It's funny because it is a play on the original saying, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and because there's some truth to it. Things may have gotten better for queer people in the last few decades. However, there is still a lot of anger and resentment and a lot of self-esteem issues hidden beneath a thick layer of superficiality. With my novel, I wanted to explain that the explosive anger and extreme shallowness that some gay men display may be a consequence of experiencing high levels of stress during critical stages of development, of experiencing continuous rejection and having reduced agency. We are all born with the need to feel loved, but loving others is a bit of an acquired skill. Extreme selfishness is a survival strategy for people with a bad case of insecure attachment. Additionally, I have another message, which is a little experiment on empathy. Normally, we follow an underdog hero fighting a threat. We see their actions as done for the greater good. Identification with that hero creates the illusion that we're also good and that our actions, even hostile actions, are justified because we are the good guys and the bad guys deserve to be punished. But the bad guys are not a different species. We are the good guys to ourselves, but when we break the rules, we become the bad guys to someone else. So, my intention is to create dissonance, have the readers identify and sympathize with two morally repulsive characters even when they recognize their behavior as reprehensible and impossible to justify, and from the experience realize that we are not always the good guy, that sometimes we are the oppressor. My novel is also a tough love letter to Los Angeles. I love this city and I love setting my stories here, but let's be honest, LA is an easy target for satire. So think about it. What is it that you want to say with your story? Think about the stories that changed you, about the films or books that caused the most significant impact on your life. What did these stories mean to you? How did they make you feel? Did they break your heart? Did they cause you any pain? What do you think was the message? Then, think about your novel. Think about its purpose and write a short reflection. How do you want your story to make your readers feel? What is the underlying subject or theme of your story? What do you want to say with it? How do you want to change your readers? Or, if it's pure escapism, what do you want your readers to experience? Then, if you haven't already, start reading the novel you chose. Read as much as you can this week and try to finish it before week 4. Do your assignment, and I will see you in the next video. Later!